Welcome to the Green Urbanist, podcast for urbanists fighting climate change. I'm Ross. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Green Urbanist podcast, episode 45. We've been going for almost 2 years now and almost 50 episodes, which is amazing, and I feel very grateful to really fascinating people that I've been able to talk to on this podcast and how generous they've been with their time. And today I'm feeling especially grateful because I've just had a fantastic conversation with Farah Naz. Farah is an award-winning climate change strategist with over 20 years experience in the construction sector, gained in the USA, UK, Southeast Asia, and most recently the United Arab Emirates. She's a chartered engineer and she's worked on a number of high-profile sustainability strategies for buildings and master plans throughout the world. Recently, she has co-authored with Langdon Morris a book called Net Zero City: How to Overcome the Climate Crisis by 2032. It's a really well researched, put together and really well written book that sets out very clearly a framework that any city around the world could pick up and use to create a locally specific net zero action plan to achieve net zero carbon in that city within a decade. It's really quite remarkable. It's very process driven, which I really like, and it talks about a number of things that you'll be listeners to this podcast will be familiar with, things like urban design, policy, government, strategy, circular economy, also things like systems thinking. So a lot of familiar ground here, but also a lot of really new, interesting concepts, a lot of really good case studies in there as well, and pulls everything together from all these diverse places and pulls it together and shows how they all fit together and how they're all necessary, including things like social transformation and economic transformation. We have a fantastic conversation. We talk about a broad range of things, including how important it is that cities become much more data driven, that we can digitize cities literally by having a digital twin of a city and digitize planning, and then share that data across different cities so we can all learn from each other. That is something that I didn't know much about previously, but this was a really interesting part of the conversation. If you want to buy the book, and I really suggest you do, you can find that basically on Amazon or other bookstores. I suggest you go to netzerocity.com, which is the book's website, where you can then find out more. And there are links to my social media and Farah's social media in the podcast description if you want to go and learn more. Just a reminder, if you want to get in contact with me for any reason, if you want to suggest a topic, guest, or you just want to say hello, you can send me a message through my website, which is greenurbanistpod.com. There's a contact page there. You can fill out a form and I'll get an email from you. Really nice to hear from everyone who does contact. Something else you can do on the website is on the bottom right of the screen, you'll see a button that says send us a voice recording or something like that, and you can actually record yourself talking using your laptop or phone and send that recording to me, which is really cool because you guys hear my voice all the time, but I never get to hear your voice, so it would be really lovely to have that audio communication as well. Alright, for now, enjoy this excellent conversation with Farah Naz. Okay, we are now recording. Thank you so much, Farah, for joining me on the podcast. It's really good to have you.
Thank you for having me, Ross. It's a pleasure.
Can you just start off by telling us a bit about yourself?
So my name is Farah Naz. I am a fellow of CIBSE and a chartered building service engineer. I started my career 20 years ago working in USA. Then I worked in UK for 8 years, Southeast Asia, and now for the last 7.5 years, I'm working in the Middle East. So I consider myself a climate optimist. And I work in the field of climate, so I'm a climate strategist. I work with cities to look at their net zero transition of cities, look at energy, master planning, and also the health and well-being side. I worked on the first net zero building designed in UK, which was 12 years ago, which is Ashmont Primary School. That's how my own journey in net zero started. It was with Pinar and Prasad Architect, and this is how my own journey of net zero transition started. And currently in Middle East, I am involved in the Museum of the Future, which has a net zero plan roadmap, sustainability pavilion Terra with Grimshaw's, where I worked in a capacity on the sustainability side, innovation and net zero transition of the pavilion, as well as BIA headquarters by Zahas, which also has just open, and it has a sustainability agenda beyond the norm, and it also looks at the future of work and net zero and health and well-being. So I've been very fortunate to be working in the net zero space, and recently I co-authored a book. It's called Net Zero City with Langdon Morris, and the whole idea of the book is to create this sense of awareness, create and understand how we can, as city leaders, as private and public sector, we can start this net zero journey and make it really simple for people, so we can take ownership as citizens. You don't have to be an architect, engineer. We take ownership of our own life and the city that we live in towards this net zero transition.
Fantastic. I've been reading your book. Thank you so much for sending me a copy. It's really, really good. I'm really enjoying it, because there's a lot of books about climate change that are very concerning and are very hard hitting, and then there are books that are very inspirational. But this book is very instructional. It tells you what to do, and I love that, because it's very action oriented. It's very it's very proactive, and it's very sort of to the point, which I think is what we need at this point. Can you tell us a bit more about the book? What is your purpose, I guess, for writing it? What was your motivation? And what are sort of the main elements of it?
So thank you for the question, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on the book. And you're absolutely right. This book is about action. This book is about the time is now, and we all have to come together with an action plan. So the background of the book is that I've been working in the area of built environment for the last 20 years. I've been involved in quite a few of energy master planning and net zero transition for building level, master planning level, and city level in different parts of the world, and currently for the last 7.5 years in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. And Langdon Morris, who is an innovation consultant who has a background in architecture, recently conducted a course in London School of Economics on city planning, city design, and that's how myself and Langdon came together. Now, interesting part is when an engineer and an innovation consultant comes together, we look at a problem from a challenges perspective and look at opportunities. The whole idea of the book is to make climate science really simple. The idea of the book is to come up with an action plan that can really be taken forward by the city leaders. So if you go to the book's website, netzerocitybook.com, we essentially talk about a 10-year transitional plan, a transformation plan, how the cities can go to net zero and meet their criteria and targets. Now, why it's 10 years? Because when we look at the UN SDG goals, the UN SDG goals talks about 10 years. It's very important to reach the UN SDG goals globally from a 10 years time period. If you look at the NASA results and the climate scientist results, it's absolutely clear that 30 years is too long to get to net zero transition. And if we wait and don't do anything, next 30 years, our biodiversity will go really worse. So essentially, as a humanity, as a community, we all have to come together and make a decision towards this net zero transition from now. And essentially, this book brings that idea of action plan. Therefore, we present the 10-year action plan. We have these 5 key pillars that we talk about. One is about governance. The other one is about urban design. We talk about energy. We talk about innovation. And we talk about data science. Circular economy is a big part of this transition. And the reason why we have segmented these 5 pillars is to show that as a city, we need data. We need data from urban design. We need data from our circular economy and waste generation. So we need all this information come together. But then we have to be quite understanding of how this information is used and revised. Hence, the policy part is very important. We talk about urban data science, where circular economy information and innovation information and urban design information comes all together for the citizens and for the city leaders to make a choice. Now, why do we say that? We say that because in order for the city leaders to make a decision whether we should build the next hospital, or whether we should address the urban context and health and well-being in a different way, and invest that funding rather on community development or creating healthier workplaces or look at the air pollution. Now, if we want to make those decisions, it's an investment decisions. Hence, the data comes really important to
Mm.
a data-driven design. Now, in the built environment, we talk about data-driven design from buildings perspective, but think of it. If we can innovate at scale, if we can make those data-driven designs in a city level, if we can really understand how a health and well-being of a city, how the energy transition of a city, where are the roadblocks, what are the success stories, then we can revive, take a look back, and really understand what policies need to come together, what policies are missing, what innovation do we really need to make those transitions. So the book essentially talks about these phases where first the city leaders comes together and creates this action plan, and then every year we revive and we look at the action plan to understand what are the success stories, what are the proof of concepts. So I really urge everybody to look at our website, the netzerocitybook.com, and really get the head around and really come and talk to us about how we make can cities much better. So that we talk about 4 phases: preparation phase, which a momentum phase where we bring everything together, transformation phase, and completion phase. And these phases are extremely important because as a city leaders, we need to involve, we need to understand, we need to assess where we are, we need to look back, we need to understand the proof of concepts, because that's extremely important for any cities. Like, for example, if we are really addressing circular economy, why is it working? Why is not working? Net zero is a complex topic and it's a simple topic. As essentially finding the path to least resistance, finding an action plan, finding something is simple for every one of us to take leadership on, I think is essentially important. And me and Langdon agree on this topic, and hence we are working on it together because that's how the whole idea of the book came about. Um, when we started working on this book, the idea was to come up with a simple action plan that people can take ownership of. I did not know at that time I will be the first author from the Middle East region, a British engineer writing about the net zero transition. And in the book, there's 113 case studies. We looked at different case studies across the globe, and there's so many amazing experiences and examples, but we also found 112 of them are very positive one and one was negative, and we did include that in the book because we want people to understand what good looks like and what not to do and have those judgment moments within themselves.
Wow, fantastic! I mean, it's just so exciting, and I can feel your positive energy and your optimism about it. I guess an obvious question is, it's the idea is that it's not about European cities or Middle Eastern cities or North American cities. It sort of should be applicable to all cities globally. Um, is that really the case? I mean, I'm just thinking like there must be huge differences and huge challenges between, say, a developing megacity in Africa or a small city in France, just as an example.
No, very important question. So uh, from COP27, what we identified is that um, all cities have to come up with their net zero transition roadmaps. The idea is that all cities have to come up with their own net zero transition. Now, if we have a similar framework globally, then it's easier to understand what success looks like. The whole idea of the book is come up with a very simplified action plan. And then, of course, each city wise and each country wise and context wise, it will be a little bit different. For example, an African country might have a lot happening on their biodiversity. There might be a lot of focus on, they might have a lot of water as a resource, and that water could be used in a different way. They might have a lot of solar power as a resource or some other resource. So essentially, this whole journey starts by identifying what is the city's parameters of
Mm,
greenhouse gas emission from a built environment perspective, from a mobility perspective, from other perspective, and then really identifying where do they stand in that scale of their CO2 emission. Now, an African city is very much different than a Middle Eastern city, where there's very water stretched. Most water is coming from desalination of
mm,
seawater, where there must be a lot of sand. Sand is a resource. There's a lot of sun, but there's a lot of heat building up. So each city has its own challenges and each city has its own opportunities. So the key is to have a very simplified framework that could be used and applied in every city to identify what is the base case scenario and identify two very simple questions. Where is the current emissions coming from? And how much emission has already emitted in the globally from that
mm,
city. And I think that creates a parameter to take them for the next conversation is okay, then what kind of innovations we can bring in, or what kind of circular economy strategies we can create to create that circular model for a city to be more resource efficient. So the whole idea of the action plan we present, and if you look at the action plan, it's a series of questions, and
mm,
the idea is that city leaders, private sector, and public sector can use those questions for their own design thinking workshops to identify what is their key challenge, what is the key opportunity, and how to take it forward.
mm,
So, hence, island city might have a different challenges and opportunities than an African city, than Brazil, or then somewhere in Dubai or somewhere in New York. So, we want people to take ownership. We also want people to have diversity in their thinking. So essentially, the roadmap that we have devised allows people to ask those conscious questions to create a roadmap that works for that city. But then
mm.
also, the lessons could be learned for other cities to learn from them and identify what are the cases. Think of a world if we are having the next COP27 in November. But in a year from now, if we actually have data from, I don't know, 400 cities of the world saying, where are they, not just in their carbon journey, but also what are they doing in the mobility? What are they doing in urban design or health and well-being? If we have a clear data and as citizens of the world, we are able to see that data, understand it, we will be making more of a conscious choices in our daily lives. Right now, we have to read a lot of reports to understand and get a view. But what if we have a visualization to walk us in that journey? So essentially, I hope I'm answering your question because the idea is to give each city the ownership through using mind mapping and design thinking process to identify what is the right solution, what is the right approach, what are the right questions for the cities, the young people, the leaders, and for the transition.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's about having a process that is quite maybe quite similar, but that
Yes,
will be locally specific because it's
exactly.
done by local stakeholders, local people.
Yes,
I think that's absolutely key because there's always the risk, I suppose, of when these sorts of strategies are left to say Western consultants, and I've
yes,
been on this side of it as well as a Western
yes.
consultant, and you go over even the best, with the best intentions uh, can be difficult to actually come up with local solutions that work.
Exactly. May I give you an example?
Yeah.
In the Middle East, there are few months of the year we have 100% relative humidity.
Wow.
100% relative humidity, and the temperature is between 45 degrees centigrade to 55
Oh
degrees
my gosh.
centigrade. If someone has not experienced it themselves, they will not be able to design an outdoor thermal comfort solution for
Mm,
that city. Now, people who live and work in Middle East, they understand what works, the layers of information and design that goes into to make those outdoor spaces comfortable. But for a person who has never lived, worked in Middle East during those summer hottest months will not be able to fathom a design or even think
Mm,
how what solutions would be realized. So, and this is something I experienced for the last 7.5 years being in Middle East. Is that it's amazing to bring best practice solutions from different part of the world, but contextualizing using technology and wisdom. It's not just about knowledge, it's about experience and wisdom.
mm,
And we talk about that in the book. We talk about theory of wisdom, we talk about theory of social change, talk about big shifts. The reason why we talk about these things is that it's very important to take knowledge and add the experience and the wisdom element to identify a solution that's very much context specific. Otherwise, reaching to net zero will be not just challenging from a technical perspective, it will be challenging from a social and structural
mm.
perspective as well.
Let's talk a little bit about urban design is one of
Yes,
your main pillars in the book.
yes.
Obviously, my main area of interest as an urban designer. What are you proposing, I guess, or what are you trying to get across?
So, on the urban design section, essentially we talk about the urban design framework. And this is something, it comes from London School of Economics, where they're working with urban design framework for quite a bit of time, and they're using these 5 pillars. But when we are talking about in the book, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. In the book, we talk about urban systems framework. The urban systems framework has 5 elements. First one is the governance and policy. Second one is urban design and master planning. The third one is food, energy, water nexus. The fourth one is circular economy. And the fifth element is innovation and scale. Now, what do we mean by that? The first one, governance policy, we really need, when we say we, I mean as a global citizens, every
Mm,
city really needs some policies and governance that is focused on net zero transition. Now, we might not know how that look like, but that's where the city leaders, the experts come in to run through the design thinking workshop. What would a net zero master plan for an urban design would look like? And these are the key questions we ask, like how do we conceive of, design, and build or rebuild our cities? And what are the design guidelines and principles to be followed to facilitate attaining net zero? And we have a whole chapter talking about this, chapter 7. The second part of the question is urban infrastructure. We build a lot of infrastructure. What we don't realize is that buildings consume 40% of global greenhouse gas emission, but there's road networks, there's street lighting, there's bridges. So how do we bring the infrastructure conversation and the energy required for our infrastructure in this whole energy transition? That part often gets missed out or
mm,
often not doesn't get accounted for. So when we're talking about urban infrastructure, we are bringing that element in. But then we're adding a third layer, which is called food, energy, water nexus. Now, food production takes energy, it requires water. Some parts of the world, food is imported because they can't produce food. Water is important because there's not enough water. Look at Middle East region. There's a huge transition now happening, food security, but food security is a global challenge. So
mm,
when we are talking about urban infrastructure, we're essentially bringing in food, energy, water nexus, the relationship of that from an infrastructure perspective, from a buildings perspective, and food production perspective. So we have a chapter 8 that's focused on these 3 topics. The third element of this is the circular economy. Circular economy, Ellen MacArthur Institute is doing quite a bit of work on circular economy. And the key question we ask is what economic models and frameworks facilitate the transition to net zero and provide a guidance to run a net zero economy? So in chapter 9 of the book, we talk about that. We talk about case studies globally that's happening essentially to inspire people to come up with an action plan. But a circular economy or urban economics needs to connect with the urban governance and policy. The policy needs to
Mm.
support. It's a vice versa. The last thing we talk about is urban culture and society. That's innovation at scale. And the questions we ask is that how shall we manage the enabling process of innovation to guide the creation of solutions to these problems, to solve the physical, technical, technological, and economic and cultural and governance problems that we now confront? Because net zero is not just a technical challenge, it's a
Mm.
societal challenge. And we ask the question, how shall we do it in a way that leads to better cities, better health and well being, provides a good business case and equity for us as a
Mm.
city? So, in chapter 10 of the book, you will see we go quite deep in that. But essentially, what we are trying to say is that if we want to create net zero cities, we have to look at the policies and governances. We have to address the master planning from an urban infrastructure perspective. Food, energy, water next is a big part of urban infrastructure. We cannot just look at master planning just from a neighborhood perspective. We really need to understand where the food is coming from. Do we grow food in this master plan? Where is the food coming from? And how is the waste getting out of that master plan to somewhere else?
Mm.
We really need to start looking at circular economy from a waste perspective, from a plastic perspective, from even livability perspective. And lastly, if we are to use technology and innovation, we really must understand how can it serve the truest, biggest purpose of the humankind. Not to use technology and innovation for the sake of it, but really support the human scale, the humanity, the children. And how do we connect all these together? So this is what we are trying to say. We are trying and we're aiming that urban planners, city leaders, architects like yourself, landscape architect, ecology, when they read this chapter, they open up their thinking and
Mm.
and ask the question in their next project is that where is the food coming from?
Mm.
Where is the waste going? How can we think in a circular city concept? Or what innovation can I add that actually has a social purpose, a technical purpose, and a business purpose? So essentially, we are asking the community to ask these questions in their next project, next design thinking workshop. And that's how we can um, anticipate change.
Mm. It sounds like currently in the UK anyway, which is my most of my working experience, is a lot of changes in cities and towns is driven by the private sector, and actually the
Yes,
public sector doesn't necessarily have the power, the resources, and the funding to actually
yes,
get really stuck in and thinking about how all of
yeah,
these things work and making changes. So it does sound like a lot more power and a lot more resources will need to flow to these city level
exactly.
governments.
Yes, and
Yeah.
if you look at the roadmap that we have different colors, and some of the colors are for business initiatives and entrepreneurs, some are for investors, because the conversation has to happen in all levels. It's not just a
Okay.
policy level, it's not just an expert level. We really need to understand where the funding from cities are coming from. How is
Mm.
it funded? We really need to have those conversations with city leaders in terms of funding mechanism, technology, and all these questions, and also social entrepreneurship, because once we connect all the dots and link it together, that's when we are going to see a societal change. Otherwise, it's a bit disjointed, which we already see in
Yeah.
different parts of the world. But the good thing is, I just saw on LinkedIn yesterday that UK is now approving a net zero set of guidelines.
Mm.
Which was formulated from by CIBSE and RIBA and other entities. This is absolutely fantastic because the guidelines will then drive a lot of change. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody is seeking perfection. But
Mm.
if we are not challenging ourselves to be in these situations and to push ourselves to find the solution, we will never find it. I was reading the Mariana Mazzucato's book, The Mission Economy. I don't know whether you've read this,
I haven't
but
know.
essentially she talks about to putting a man in the moon, and in 10 years US have done it. And when Kennedy has promised the people we're going to put a man in the moon, he didn't even know whether it would be possible. NASA didn't know, but they had 10 years to do it. And essentially, that's one of the premises of this book, where we're saying, let's put a target in, even if we fail. But if we start with the right intention and start working, even if we fail, we might find out that we are 80% there. It's just,
Mm.
there's no failure, there's just learning experience. But if we don't try with a higher purpose, a higher intention, a higher goal, we will be already on the back seat because we are not pushing ourselves enough. And in COP26, it was so clear that we have all the technologies globally,
Yeah.
we have all the knowledge, we have the innovation. What we really need is funding mechanism and global planning, globally planning, action planning to create these solutions and to implement that and to understand it. Um,
It does seem like 10 years is seems extremely short.
yes,
Most people will probably see that like a 10-year action plan, you think that's crazy. Even 30 years
yes,
seems like very difficult. Is
exactly.
is your intention with that to sort of get people moving faster, and as you say, even if we don't hit it and we hit it in 15 or 20 years, that's still better than what we're sort of pace we're
Exactly.
going at now.
Exactly. So if we wait for 30 years and think, let's continue business as usual, then we might be doing more harm to the globally, to our biosphere. Then if we move forward thinking, okay, we have 10 years to do it and let's try to do our best and see what we can do, then we might come up with action plan strategies which pushes the agenda, because essentially the business case needs to move. We can't be doing business as usual. But if still
Mm,
people are planning to invest in coal mining and think that's a good business and let's move on, if still people are thinking, oh, fossil fuel economy will still be there and let's carry on, we want to make that shift. We want to make that fundamental mindset shift from a business level, a societal level. And in order to make that shift, we all have to come together. So the idea is that, yes, 10 years is short. 10 years, we might not get 100% reduction, but if we start hard with an action plan, with an intention, in 10 years, we might see that we have achieved 80%, and that might be a really good reduction. But if you look at the climate science and the CO2 emission that has we have already emitted globally, there's two challenges. One, we have to stop more CO2 and greenhouse gas emission going on the biosphere because it's creating more worse situation. But the second point is we have to reduce whatever we have emitted. We have to find a way
mm,
to resolve it. So we have two challenges with us. One is to ensure that we don't emit too much and understanding what that too much looks like, and also to reduce what we have already done. So it's we are already in a dilemma. It's not that while we are trying to reduce our emission, we are not emitting, we are still emitting globally.
yeah.
And the challenge is that if a country A emits CO2 or methane and all these gases, the biosphere is one biosphere, and that can impact other countries which we might not even think of.
Yeah.
We know that from scientists, but what I'm trying to say is that we don't often realize the impact of our actions can have a multitude of ripple effects globally.
Mm,
And I think climate science is essentially telling us that it has an impact and we have to act quite swiftly, quite smartly. And myself and Langdon both are optimists. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to write this book. And we are okay to take challenges and feedbacks and criticisms because someone has to do it.
yeah. Yeah. Let's stay on this topic of economics, because it seems like our economic models are driving a lot of our ecological destruction and overconsumption. Um, that's something that you talk about a lot in the book, about like a new model for economics, or a new way for
Yes.
cities to a new way for economics to exist in cities. Can you extrapolate a bit on that?
Yes. So essentially, what we're talking about is that we really need an ecosystem of bringing new technologies in and really understanding what is the funding model of what is the funding mechanism of cities. So, if a city wants to decide that they want to grow and they want to grow their GDP, great. Then, what are the decisions a city can make to grow their GDP in a positive way that will not impact the environment? Now, growing
Mm,
your GDP might mean moving your country or your city in a more electrification. Now, the question is, how do we do it? Where do we do it? And how do we start? So, I'll give you an example. Now we are looking at net zero construction sites. I'll give. Now, how do we make a construction site net zero? Because a construction site has a lot of diesel generators,
Mm,
it has a lot of equipment coming in, and a lot of construction activities are happening. Now we are looking at, in New York, they're actually looking at electrification of buildings. So, what I've just explained to you, a net zero construction site and electrification of buildings, 10 years ago, we wouldn't be even talking about these things.
okay.
We wouldn't can even imagine. So the current business model, the current what is business as usual, we really need to shift the thinking, shift the mindset. And it starts with you. It starts with really asking the question, like investors, really, there's a net zero investor alliance in UK. And if you look at the latest predictions from Net Zero Investors Alliance, they own, I think, 5.3 trillion US dollars properties, and it's a network of 71 investors globally. They're predicting that the next few years there will be a lot of assets next to the coastal area will be suffering and struggling, and there will be a lot of destruction. So, how do we ensure that climate is actually not harmfully impacting these assets?
Mm,
How do we ensure that there is not an energy shortage of different cities of the world? There are parts of the world, while you and I'm not talking, they don't have electricity for the last 3 years, sorry, 3 hours.
mm,
So the question is that right now we live in a society where energy is, some parts of the world are really struggling to get energy to keep their lives day to day, and some parts of the world are overusing energy.
mm,
So creating that equity, creating that balance, we really need to start looking at from a business perspective. And BlackRock and other financial organizations have already, you will see they're talking about net zero transitions. And the next wave of net zero strategies and transition we will be seeing is from the financial sector. Hence,
mm,
you will see banks like HSBC, a Bank of Royal Bank of Scotland, all of these banks globally, not just these few of them, globally banks are now really having this net zero conversation with their clients, really understanding how do they protect their investments for their um, investors, for their clients. So I think the next 3 to 5 years will be extremely important to rethink the business case, to rethink what good looks like, to rethink the business model, and really understand how can we make this transition. Now, in order to do that, we really need collaborative co-thinking. We really need a team of people, of experts and banking professionals and climate strategies and professors coming together. We really need to create these core teams, this core knowledge platform where this conversation can drive, where we can come up with an action plan, learn from it, and then disseminate the learning in the other parts of the world. So, what's done in Maldives maybe, and what worked for Maldives maybe can be replicated in some parts of Boston. Stuff like that. So that's the type of knowledge economy that we want to go towards.
I wonder what you think of sort of. There's a couple of sort of alternative economic models that are getting very popular in the last couple of years, like donut economics, and
Yes,
concepts like degrowth. What do you think of that?
I think those concepts are important. We really need a proof of concept of those concepts.
Yeah, yeah.
We need to learn from them so we can understand where we can optimize the learning and for what cities. So these concepts are amazing, and we mention it in the book. What we really need for next 3 to 6 months or maybe an year's time to adopt, to implement the concept in a proof of concept, and the learning can be disseminated in a global scale so all of us can learn different parts of the world, different cities,
Mm,
and then see where each city, where these can be optimized for better growth, for better performance, for better results. Now, what might work in Tanzania might not work in Saudi Arabia, in a city in Saudi Arabia. What might work in a Tabuk, a city in Saudi, might not work in Dallas.
mm,
So I am a firm believer of proof of concepts. It's coming from an engineering background. This is what we do. And
mm,
once a proof of concept is done, you understand what worked, you understand the lessons learned, but we also understand what it didn't work. And those unsuccessful failures that we call it in the societal norm, I think is very important because one thing, one point or one solution might not have worked and it might have failed for a city A, but that very point might be a very right solution for a city B.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So essentially, what I'm saying is that we really need to test these concepts in city level, in proof of concepts, learn from them, disseminate, and then share the learning.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to donut economics, they thankfully the Donut Economics Action Lab is doing really good work with at the city level with places like Amsterdam and Brussels
Yeah,
who are making plans and putting them in. So we can watch those over the next couple of years and see how they work, which is fantastic.
and Donut Economics Action Lab essentially needs to become part of our net zero alliances to then share the learnings to see, okay, what are the what worked, what didn't work. And that's where the conversation of data comes in. We really need good
Mm.
data to really understand and do the scenario planning.
Yeah, so this is something that I've maybe overlooked is the importance of data. Well, it yeah, tell us a bit more about that. I know you mentioned it earlier, but
So um, globally, we know what BIM is. BIM is a building information modeling, and mechanical engineers, architects, and others can see how the building works together, how the building breathes. They can understand clashes and take it forward. Essentially, in the book, what we talk about is a urban twin, a digital urban twin, because when myself and Langdon was thinking about it, we thought, okay, how would a city understand whether something is working or not working? How would a city understand a policy, the impact of that policy? Now, we in the book we talk about proof of concepts. Great, you use a proof of concept, you take the learning, you adopt it, but then how does a city official make those choices
mm,
to understand the i- impact of the proof of concept in the following years and months? So essentially creating urban twin of a city that has, for example, traffic data to waste management data to hospital data to health and well-being data, then a city official can actually map the morbidity level of a city or accidents level of a city to a good or a bad urban design challenge. They can actually look at the air pollution problem of a city and then say, hang on a minute, can we optimize the design in certain way to address
mm,
this? But in order to do that, we need good data. We need visualization of data in an urban city level. We really need to understand if a net zero policy, I just talked about the net zero policy when you asked me about the urban design. We really need to understand if a city implements a net zero policy, the impact of that. The impact of that in mobility, the impact of that in urban growth, the energy transition. Uh, what are the ripple effects that's taking place and not taking place? So I think data plays a huge role in terms of two things: scenario planning, risk management for a city, and really understanding where the city stands in the net zero transition. If we are not able to look back, how can we look forward?
mm.
And the only way we can look back, reflect, and understand is when we have data to show us what the impact and implication of our design. That is when the concept of scenario planning comes in. Then we take the data, we look at a city neighborhood level and say, okay, in 2050, when the climate will be this or the sea level will be rising, what is the impact of that in a city level?
I was really fascinated to read about the scenario planning aspect of it,
Yes,
and I would love for that to become more commonly used in general urban design for new
yes,
developments, that kind of thing. Because I think sometimes when you're designing something, a building or a new neighborhood, there's you almost have to project certainty, and you say like this is how it's going
yes.
to be, but actually we don't have any certainty really about the future. So I think that I would love to see in master plans going forward, people would say we think, there's 5 things that could happen in the future, and here is how we're building in that resilience to our master plan. It just seems incredibly sensible.
I will quote Simon Sinek on this. A colleague of mine sent me this quotation, and I so believe on this. It says, "Though we crave for certainty, innovation and progress happens where we allow ourselves to embrace uncertainty."
Mm,
And I think this is such a wise word from Simonson, especially when we are talking about net zero and climate science. Because in order for net zero to take place for any city, three things needs to come together. The climate science, innovation, and business opportunities, those three things needs to align. But we as city officials need to understand, if we are creating the same way and thinking of the same way how a city should perform, what is the success factor of a city? And if we don't allow innovation and progress from a if we are not allowing them from embracing them from an uncertainty perspective, we will not be able to get to net zero. Because if you look at the cities of the world, no city has achieved net zero.
Yeah.
They have achieved nearly to net zero in certain aspects. Certain cities are nearly to net zero. But then there are cities in the world has zero effect of net zero. They are not even there. So the challenge is that we have to allow ourselves to embrace uncertainty. We have to get used, and that is a new mindset shift, the business shift that we, as consultants, as business owners, as officials, have to face. Because if we wake up every day and do the same things we have done yesterday, if we wake up and not have a vision of the future and what that vision would look like, if we wake up and we are not inspired enough to create that vision of the future, how can we expect change to happen? Because we ourselves haven't changed. Our mindsets haven't
Yeah.
changed. And if you look at our society, our cities, it's humans. It's us who are driving change. Now, as a person in the world, if I am not able to change myself to a new thinking, a new business model, how can I expect my city leaders or my ministers or my policymakers to be able to do that? Because I'm failing that myself as a human, you know?
Yeah.
So, what I'm trying to present here is the idea that if we want to make a better vision of future of ourselves, we really need to start from interior ourselves and make those initial changes within ourselves that can actually then make a ripple effect and changes to outside.
I
Because
think
if
that's
we are not inspired by our own actions, then how can we inspire others?
I think that's very wise. Very wise indeed. I think possibly one of the challenging things about just this transition to net zero, which you set out in your book so well, is just how many different elements there are to
Yeah.
consider and how, in a sense, multi-dimensional it is.
Yes.
Do you have a feeling from a, say, thinking in a systems thinking way about what maybe the higher leverage points are that people really need to tackle? Because I imagine, as you say, we have all the technical solutions, but there are social and cultural and economic and political barriers in the way. So it seems like there are those other leverage points that need to be pulled to allow the
So
technical solutions to come through.
it's important, and hence that's the question of design thinking comes into place. A higher
Mm,
leverage point for a city in Brazil might be different than a city in Saudi Arabia, than a different for a city in Baltimore or
yeah, yeah,
Lake District, you know.
yeah,
So because each city performs in a different way, and each city is a group of people, a mindset who comes together to build that city, and they know the history of the city, and they know the people, and they know what works for a city or not. So the question of that higher leverage point is something that will be quite individual and contextual for that city and the people.
yeah,
But we might find that the leverage points might come from food security or energy security or water security, or maybe some other social structural impact. So I think it's very so hence the book talks about this approach to design thinking, this approach to scenario planning, because this is how a city would understand what are the leverage points are, where are the risks, and where are the opportunities. And this is where the city leaders, the private and public sector comes together, the youth and the younger generation comes together to then have those conversations to convert those opportunities into practical action plans, to
Mm.
convert those challenges into opportunities, and to convert those blockages into collaborative places to be, to work, to workshop on.
Mm.
And and each of these might be different for one city than to other, and hence the conversation where data comes into place, because if there was a global data platform that talks about these challenges, the leverage points, if there's a framework of net zero followed by each part of the world, each cities, then globally as COP27 and COP28, the next COPs come in, city leaders can actually see what other cities are doing. Right now, what we don't have is we don't have as humanity a one action plan.
Right.
We have different things happening, which is great. Diversity is amazing, but then diversity needs to be put together in a very actionable way. And if you see the global organization C40 cities are doing amazing work, World Green Building Council are doing amazing work, COP26, 27 are happening, but we need to put all these work together into one coalition plan where the city data and everything can be joined together for city
Mm.
leaders to make those decisions, to understand the decisions, and to do the scenario planning. Because many parts of the world, if you see from NASA report, might not even be there 10 years from now.
Mm.
But just because the data shows that doesn't mean maybe we can take an action tomorrow that can actually work collaboratively to save that piece of land or save those lives that might be
Yeah.
impacted. Like I've seen NASA reports where it shows different island countries, Bangladesh, India, parts of India, and parts of other countries might not exist in next 20 years. Well, this is going with the idea that nothing will be done,
Right.
or things will be done, but it might not be impactful. But what if we create a scenario where we have an action plan to say, okay, why don't country A takes A, B, C, D action. We monitor it to see whether any progress have happened in the next 2 years, and maybe that can give us a different scenario planning
Mm.
for the countries to be saved and towards more equitable and resilient future.
Can you? So we've been talking a lot about quite, I suppose, sort of high level aspects, and I wonder, just for the last couple of minutes, could you bring it to life a little bit with us? Do you have any examples that you think are really good case studies of places that have gotten bits of this framework right?
So I worked long time ago when I was working for a company. We did the uh, for City of Netherlands. We did the green economy report, and where Copenhagen wanted to be carbon neutral by 2025.
Mm.
And that green report has been updated for the last 12 years in many forms, and Copenhagen has reached quite a lot of number of um, places where they have actually pushed the boundaries. I think Netherlands and Copenhagen and few other countries of the world are doing amazing job because they're aligning their policies with their agendas, and they're also doing a big piece on the education awareness and frameworks. So a citizen knows what good looks like. A
Mm.
Swedish person will know recycling is very important and will be very happy to do 7 sets of recycling, filling up 7 sets of
Mm.
recycling bags, where a person from another country who are not used to those things might complain. And I've seen that myself. So um, I think knowledge and awareness plays a huge part. And many countries in Europe have done a really good job to inspire the younger generation, because the children becomes the future leaders,
Mm.
and I think there's something to learn from there. There are countries who are doing some amazing innovation. Their policies might not be aligned for net zero, but there are some countries who are doing really good case studies. Like, for example, there are really good case studies in India and other parts of the world happening in Brazil. There's a young gentleman who just won the MIT Innovator of the Year award because he's converting algae into solar panels. So there's a lot of these things happening, but we need to bring it together from a net zero transition perspective and really understand what the impact of that technology from a bigger scale. So
Mm.
I think what I'm saying is that there's a lot of good case studies happening. There's not enough knowledge and awareness about them and how to implement
Right.
them in a global scale. So that's something is missing. What I'm also saying is that we need kind of like a qualitative coalition action plan to really take it forward. That's the only way I see that we can really push this agenda in a collaborative manner, because net zero is not just a commitment of one or two countries, it's a global challenge. And even the few countries, even if they decide they're not going to sign the net zero coalition, they will still be impacted by climate change. So how do we create
Yeah.
that knowledge and awareness? If you go through the book, you will see that we talk about 113 case studies. Like, for example, in Middle East, BIA headquarters has done amazing. They have really pushed the boundaries of creating a very socially responsive, sustainable building, and now they're pushing the current agenda of net zero. And we talk very elaborately on net zero as one of our case studies. Um, I do talk about in the book about Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance and the work that they're doing in UK and the impact of that. There are countries where they have adopted these different policies and they're looking at it. So it's a bit hard to say one or two favorites because there's a lot happening.
Yeah,
Hence,
yeah.
we have 113 case studies. But I think what we would be very interesting for us is to look at the future. What's the next step for these countries? How far they have come and where they're going with it.
So I have a final question that I always ask every guest, which is kind of funny because we've been talking about this question the whole way through the episode, which is I always ask people from your perspective what needs to happen or change in the next decade to ensure successful climate action.
So what I will say is that decade is for too long for me. I'm a climate optimist. So what I would say is that the action that needs to happen in the next COP27 in Egypt is to countries really agree on an implementational action plan that
Right.
different countries, different cities of the world can take forward. In the next 3 to 5 years, what we would really like to see is that each country, each city has a net zero action plan and really working towards it from a technical perspective, from an innovation perspective, from an urban design perspective. We would like to see each city to have their net zero coalition ambassadors to take this forward. And in next 5 6 years time we want to see more data driven design, data driven city design, and more information on cities and countries to see two things: how they're making decisions to reduce future carbon emission in the atmosphere, and secondly what they're doing to reduce the already emitted carbon emission from
Mm.
their footprint. We would really like to see that. And uh, I truly believe that if we start with the right intention, we have the right backing of funding mechanisms and support, and we have a strategic way of looking forward with evidence. It's truly possible if we, as a humanity, can put a man in the moon in 10 years' time. I don't think net zero is such a big challenge. The reason why it's a big challenge is because it requires change, and people don't like change. It requires a different way of doing business. But this can be only driven by city government officials, by private sectors, and public sectors. So we
Mm.
really need to change that mindset, the business as usual mindset, and move our mindset. So a mindset, a heart set, and then the business shifts.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Farah. This has been really fascinating. And I'd urge anyone listening to go out and get a copy of the book, which you can find online. And I'll have links in the episode description so you can get a link to that. But yeah, where can people find out more about you and the book online?
So we have a website. Website is www.netzerocitybook.com. I have my own website, www.farahnaz, FARAHNAZ, sustain.com. They can reach out. We have a Net Zero City Book Twitter page and also LinkedIn page. So people can reach out. They can email me, tweet me, and then I'm very happy to work with anyone, answer any questions.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. Excellent. We'll leave it there. And looking forward to finishing the book and talking to you again.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you for having me. And those who are listening, I really hope that I can play a little role in your own net zero transition. And if you have any questions, please reach out to Ross and myself, and I'm sure we can answer lots of questions.